Hi, welcome back to my channel. There are so many introductions I have thought about for this book right here called Corrections in Ink. It's a memoir by Keri Blakinger. Now, I am going to put a screenshot up so that I don't have to hold the book for the whole video. Now, one thing I was thinking about is I thought about Tonya Harding, okay? Another thing I thought about when I was watching this book was, I can't think of the show, but when people are trying to help somebody that is addicted and they try to, it begins with an I, but I'm drawing a blank. Fibrofrog, it does that every time. So I thought about those examples when I was reading this book here, Corrections in Ink. Now, we have a figure skater whom I had never heard of until I read this book. And her name, as I said, was Keri Blakinger. I hope I am saying it right, and forgive me if I'm not. And she started off as a young girl, maybe between 7 and 8, when her parents realized that she had a talent on the ice. So she became a figure skater. However, during those years that Miss Blakinger was on the ice, when she was off the ice, a lot of things were happening in her life. I'm still trying to think of that show. And I know if I don't say it in this video, you can put it in the description below. By the way, there is a term for when people forget specific words. And I forget specific words simply due, I think, to fibro, but that's neither here nor there. Now, one thing I have to say about this book, if I haven't already said, it's a memoir, okay? I checked Goodreads, and this is the 14th memoir I have read since last year, so I am trying to read more memoirs, at least a few a year, as many as I can. But when I was reading this book was so hard that I put it down twice, maybe even 3 times. The first time I put it down is because I was going to go to bed, and her recollections were so hard-hitting that I was afraid that I'd have night terrors, which is part of my mental health issues. Second time I put it down is I was going to the Kingdom Hall that day, and I didn't want to think about her experiences because this book is very raw. And the third time I put it down was just to take a deep breath. But I did finish it, and I'm glad I finished it because it's educational. Like, I could read historical fiction and find it educational. Of course, if I read a memoir, there is something educational about it. And that's just me when it comes to reading, is I like to know about things and people's experiences and what makes someone bounce back. Okay? Now, trigger warnings. Okay? It would be cutting, eating disorders like bulimia and anorexia, suicide, sexual misconduct or sexual abuse. Lots of trigger warnings, lots. And like I said, this book is raw. Okay, so let's talk about Carrie. Okay, like I said, as a young child, she was very talented on the ice. And one thing that she started to realize at a very young age, and I mean between, say, 7 and 9 years of age, is that she wanted to be the thinnest girl on the ice. So it didn't take her long to develop eating disorders. At some point in her life, beyond the eating disorders, she was at a place when she learned about drugs. Not only did she learn about drugs as far as taking them, but she learned about drugs as to how easy it would be to sell them. Then, between selling drugs and keeping up her own habit, then she learned how to sell her body. All while she was doing this, she was a student at Cornell University. She's a bright girl. There was nothing wrong with her not mentally, that's not the right word. See, there we go again with words. You know, she was a very, very good student. But one day she got caught with heroin, and it was a lot. The street value ranged from $100 and something thousand to maybe $500,000 or it's just a lot of heroin. So she got sent to jail. So the book has segued from her childhood to her teen years to her living on the street after she ran away from home to her prostituting herself and using drugs to selling drugs to ending up in jail. Okay? Now, I don't know a heck of a lot about the jail system or the prison system. There's a show, goodness, where's my brain today? Usually I take a nap at this time of day, so I guess I must need that nap. There's a show that I watched, Behind Bars something, and I think that from what I learned is if a trial is going on or you haven't been fully sentenced, you'll be in jail for a while until you're assigned to prison. That could be wrong. I don't care if I'm wrong or right because that's neither here nor there. But part of Kerri's story was during the time she was in jail. Then her story changed slightly, or at a grand scale, depending on how you look at it, when she was in prison. So as I look at this book as a reader, as a consumer, as somebody who has a thirst for knowledge, not too much of a thirst for knowledge, because the Bible does say be babes as to badness, but full grown with powers of understanding. But as a consumer reading this book, as a book reviewer who wants to tell you about this book, I look at Kerri's life, as I said, as a child, as a teenager, as a figure skater, you know, on the street, drugs, selling drugs. So I look at her life behind bars as her jail life and also her prison life. That's just how I'm looking at it. And with that, the tragic emotions that went through me when I read this book. Oh my word. Now let me tell you something about how I consume books. I said I was a consumer. You see, I got it as a print arc, and here's the publisher letter, which usually accompanies most of my arcs. I got it on NetGalley, but it doesn't release. I mean, it released on June 7th. So since it released on June 7th, what did I do? I go to Hoopla in Overdrive to see if I can get an audio copy of it from my library. So since I was able to get an audio copy from my library, I was able to listen to it. And I'm really glad that I did, because Keri Blakinger, she narrated her own book. So I'm listening to her words. I'm absorbing her words. And yes, I felt like I was absorbing her pain. As I mentioned earlier in this video, I was concerned that my sleep might be disrupted because during one of the phases, remember I'm looking at her life in phases, one of her phases of life, with her addiction or her bulimia, they felt very triggering. Her suicide attempt, very triggering. But I continued to read it, and the last time I picked it up, I listened to it all the way through. Now, while she was in prison, she kept a journal, and that was something worth considering. Now, she had relationships in and out of prison, and those are talked about in her audiobook or her print book, whatever format you get. But what she did is she talked about the system and how the system failed prisoners. She even talked about the racial divide in prison, or the racial population percentage-wise, whites, black, Hispanic. She talked about how certain things that she was able to get away from was simply because of the color of her skin, versus if it were me and I committed the same crimes that she did, my sentence, my treatment might have been harsher because of having brown skin. I truly appreciate that she said that. And it was very, very intense. Very, very intense. But if you were to Google her, so let's just do that. This is why I'm going to tell you, I'm just Googling her, but I want to tell you what made me continue reading this hard book. It talked about, in the publisher's letter, in the fourth paragraph, I believe, fourth or fifth paragraph, said that I reached for it by getting out, getting sober, and eventually becoming a reporter who covers prisons. Holding public officials accountable and helping to expose the system that she survived. When I read that in this publisher letter, I knew that no matter how hard this book was, no matter how chilled I was, no matter how many tears I shed, I had to see how she survived. And let me tell you, Keri Blakinger is a survivor of the nth degree. So if you Google her, it says Keri Blakinger, reporter. Yes, she's a reporter. She did not let all of those things and those phases of life that I've mentioned, the eating disorders, the drug use, the sexual situations, the selling drugs, the going to jail, going to prison. She didn't let any of that stop her from succeeding. But not does she writes for Washington Post and Vice and other journals, but she is the voice for people, but mostly women in prison. And I'm telling you, one thing that I got out of this book, I feel very emotional right now. Very emotional, because one thing I got out of this book was how fortunate I am. How fortunate I am. How fortunate many, 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 many people are that have never seen the other side of prison bars. And very impactful. Very, very, very impactful. Very worthwhile memoir. You can get it anywhere. You can get it at Amazon, you can get it at Audible, you can get it from Hoopla, Libby, Overdrive, probably even possibly Scribd. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it in print, which I think it's going to be a hardback. This is a reviewer's copy, so reviewer's copy. They made 75,000 of these. They're printed as trade paperbacks, but when you purchase it, you'll probably most likely get it as a hardcover. I would say definitely read this book. Definitely read this book. And her prison term might have only been 2 years, but those were 2 hard years. Okay? And I'm going to reiterate something, and I'm looking at the back cover, and I'm glad it jumped out at me. She was shaped by privilege. Privilege. She recognizes white privilege. Black people are quick to talk about white privilege, but white people do not like talking about white privilege. She recognized white privilege, that her treatment in and out of prison would be different to somebody else if they had brown or dark skin. I appreciate that, because the prison system is broken. It really is. And I love the fact that as a reporter, as a very well-known reporter, she's going to put this out there so that people can understand what's going on. And whether it's rapes in prison, whether it's mistreatment, whether it's withholding food, whether it's beatings, whatever, she's going to expose that. And that's what she's doing. So she had to play it hard, because she was behind bars for 2 years, but she's out now. And I want to mention one other thing. How easy it is for people to get put back behind bars. The slightest infraction that you commit when you're on probation or parole could get you thrown behind bars again. She also learned that, when she first went to prison, or jail rather, she thought that while she's in jail, she can do anything. And believe me, she did. When you read this book, you'll find out. But she learned that you can get your crimes can be compounding your time. So even though she had a sentence of a minimal sentence compared to some, she had to learn the hard way that certain things that you do, you're not going to get away from or get away with. And there was one other point I wanted to mention, and it just slipped my mind. Anyway, I can't think of it, but really, really, really good read, and I'm glad that I read it. And with the trigger warnings that I mentioned, you may have to put it down once or twice, but don't let this book slip through your fingers. Give it a look-see. All right, this is a long review, so I'm going to let you go. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.